today, and thank you in particular to our brilliant guest, Ash Sarkar, who I'm so pleased to be speaking to today. I'm sure you all know that Ash is a writer, a lecturer, a broadcaster, a political commentator, and now an author. You have written the brilliant, fascinating book, Minority Rule Adventures in the Culture War, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I think we'll chat for a while and then we'll have questions at the end, if that's okay with everyone. It is a really great read, and I think it should be said that it's also really funny, which not many books like this are.
Sometimes even on purpose, not just by accident.
Well, I couldn't help. I read it and I could hear it in your voice. And I should also say that it's a bestseller. It's doing very well. And it includes a lot of unexpected things like interviews with Piers Morgan and Dominic Cummings, which maybe we can get onto. But I wanted to talk to you a bit about the process of writing it. I think I'm right in saying that you started working on it 2021?
Yeah, about that. So the thing about writing a book like this is that ideally, politics would just stop. So you would write a book proposal and everything would stay the same until the book comes out. And instead, I had like 3 prime ministers, an economic crash, and all sorts of things which just felt so alive and that made me worried. It made me worried that my analysis would be wrong because events were moving faster than I could think. And another thing happened, which I think maybe people who also write or at least work on sort of long extended projects might be able to identify with, which is you start out really confident. You're like, fuck yeah, I can do this. I'm going to get the fucking Pulitzer and the Nobel Prize and like all this shit because I'm the Don. And then you go, oh no, I'm illiterate.
It's actually so relatable.
And then you have to spend quite a bit of time like clawing yourself out of the pit of self-loathing. And it was really apparent in the sort of early drafts of some of the chapters. And my editor quite kindly had to take me to one side and say, you know, you're not writing for people who hate you. And I was like, but I'm writing for myself and I hate me. So I think that, it's like an upside down bell curve of confidence. And it felt really good to get to the end of it. And it felt like it came out at the right time. But there were times in the process where I was just like, oh, Bloomsbury made a terrible mistake.
Well, they didn't, I can say that. What pulled you out of those pits of despair?
Contractual obligations.
Nice.
Really
It's good to have them.
And I think also the people around you, if you're lucky, will know you well enough that they can give you the right kind of shit.
Yeah.
And my partner is someone who can give me the right kind of shit. And I would show him, you know, bits of writing and early drafts of chapters. And obviously all I wanted was praise. And I just wanted him to tell me that I'm very talented and very pretty and that no other woman on earth exists. But he gave me responses which really reminded me why I'm doing what I'm doing. So there was an early draft of the final chapter called Planet Landlord, where he said, brutally, James O'Brien could have written this. And I phoned up the fucking divorce lawyer. I was like, we're done. But what he meant by that, as he yelled through the locked door when I was throwing his clothes out of the window, was, you're a Marxist, you're a communist. What's communist about this? Like, either you still hold by that analysis and way of looking at the world, or you don't and you're a liberal, and that's fine. But what's communist about this? And it reminded me why I'm doing it. Mm-hmm. It then gave me a sense of what's the kind of journey I want to take the reader on. And then it meant that every time I thought I could go, well, the publisher will accept this, it pushed me that bit further in the argument. And so while that starts out as quite a tense process because it makes you question yourself, by the time you submit the thing, you actually feel really good about it.
And so, you know, that initial idea that you had when you started thinking about the book, what was that and what was it that made you want to write this book in particular?
I mean, it was the title. It was Minority Rule that kind of went and brought all these disparate elements of politics that I knew I wanted to talk about together. So for me, the term minority rule, it refers to two things. Like, one is this culture war, which I think everyone is familiar with. It's like 1,000 doors opening out into the same place, which is, here's a minority. Could be trans people, can be Just Stop Oil, could be the Palestine Solidarity Movement, and they're trying to tell you what to say, how to think, what to do, and they are taking up too much space, too much attention. And when you strip back any culture war story, it's the same one, right? The bones are the same, even if the face is a little bit different. But I do believe there is an actually existing minority rule. And I think that, again, this is something which, even if you're not super duper political, you intuitively understand and feel. You know that the economy is not operating in the interests of most people. You know that politicians aren't operating in the interests of most people. And things that should be taken for granted, that a lot of the next generation is going to be better than the one that came before. That's not the case. And because I'm a Marxist, and I also think lots of people are Marxists and they don't know they're Marxists, is that I went looking for answers in the shape of the economy and the balance of class forces in society. And by the way, a lot of conservatives do that too. I think Margaret Thatcher did that.
That's actually,
Secret Marxist.
Yeah, a good bit of the book is that part. I was going to leave this, but I think let's dig into it. The kind of most controversial and kind of spoken about element of the book is maybe actually the smallest part, which is chapter 1, which is kind of where you look critically at identity politics and the left. And when I came to read the book, I was surprised because I think I heard about it, read about it, and I kind of expected that to be the sting in the tail at the end. I kind of expected it to be, I'm painting this picture, and actually it's coming from the left, at least in part. And that's not what you do. You kind of set it out and then you put it aside and you continue. Why start there? What was the kind of thinking for you?
So the first thing to say, which I think is really important, is that when I talk about identity politics, that's not just woke politics, all right? The right has an identity politics, and that looks often like white racial grievance. So this idea that, ethnic minorities are, swamping European lands and, white people can't buy donuts anymore, or whatever it is. That's an identity politics of the right. There's also male grievance, this idea that, women are just out to get you and they're denying you sex and they're sort of setting this high barrier for love and connection. That's a kind of identity politics. There's an identity politics of the centre, which you often see playing out, one, with the idea that transgender rights are a threat to women. I mean, that is the politics of, the liberal centre in this country. And also with the way in which anti-Semitism allegations are mobilised to derail left-wing projects and projects of Palestinian solidarity. That's a form of identity politics. But in order to talk about those things, which I knew I wanted to talk about in the book, I had to look at, how did identity become such a potent, mobilising force within politics? And that meant I did have to look at the left. And the minute you come to that conclusion, it doesn't feel honest to go, I'm just going to ignore it because it's inconvenient, because it puts my own work and my own part of the movement in the frame. And hopefully people reading the book can see that what I want isn't for the left to go, racism doesn't matter, transphobia doesn't matter, ableism doesn't matter, these things matter. But that the left cannot be so concerned with subjective experience, interior realities, if it's going to succeed. And the argument I make in the book is that this particular form of identity politics, which is obsessed with language, lived experience, irreducible difference, that's a product of liberalism. Right? These are not left-wing, Marxist, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist traditions. These are ones which come from 45 years of neoliberalism, and we've absorbed those tenets of individualism, hyper-competitiveness, and a suspicion of solidarity.
And what impact do you think that has had on the left in particular, and also politics?
It's made us fucking
more
ridiculous, man. Like, honestly.
Can you give a few examples? What do you mean?
Oh my God. Yeah, I can give so many examples. And the problem is that I've been in the room for some of these things. So there's an example that I talk about in the book, which I'm sorry you will have heard a million times by now, which was about an occasion where Roger Hallam, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, when being asked, what mistakes have the left made? What should we do next? He said, well, the problem is you're all a bunch of fucking cunts. Which is the funniest thing he could have said. And then everyone started, set about trying to prove him right by saying, well, this made me feel so harmed. I feel really unsafe. This is white anger. This is now an unsafe space for people of colour, which is crazy because cunt is not a racialised term at all. My Australian housemate says it all the time. And he means it in a nice way. Or another time, this isn't something which I put in the book because I wasn't there for it, a friend of mine was. There was a weekend which was supposed to be for organisers, and they were doing an ice-breaking exercise where you had to act out being a kitchen implement. So someone was a whisk and, someone was, a garlic crusher.
To what end?
Just like an icebreaker. Then you guess, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so then...
Got it, don't worry. That took me a second, but now I understand.
And then someone was like, acting out a salad spinner.
Of course.
Which I think is a great choice because, you can move. You can't do that with a wooden spoon, difficult. You're acting out a salad spinner, and then someone else was like, well, this is classist because working class people don't have salad spinners. And the person who was the salad spinner was like, well, we had a salad spinner and I'm working class, and everyone got very, very upset. And it was just nuts. Like, it was just crazy. And the problem isn't that people are unreasonable. There are unreasonable people everywhere. In every section of politics, there are unreasonable people. But the left has gotten very bad at marginalising those unreasonable people and saying, you know what, if you're getting upset about a salad spinner, maybe radical politics isn't for you. Because we're afraid. We're afraid of being called racist or misogynist or whatever else it is by identifying and picking out disruptive, toxic behaviours. So why this matters for me is that I want the left to succeed, right? I really want to succeed. And I look at it in the book, some of the best traditions of the left, like the Black Panther Party, involved forming coalitions from profoundly different people, between profoundly different people, including a group of young, poor, white Appalachians called the Young Patriot Movement. Their symbol was the Confederate flag, which is no good, very bad. But instead of making that a sticking point, and instead of saying, well, you've got to get rid of the Confederate flag before we work with you, the Black Panthers said, no, we're going to do the work first. And then, after that, the Young Patriots voluntarily gave up the Confederate flag because that shared experience of struggle, of shared purpose, it then created a sort of shared cultural worldview. Whereas instead, we do it the other way around. We go, well, we've got to have the shared cultural worldview before we can do anything purposeful together. And that's never going to work. That is never, ever going to work.
Do you think that there's also something about the left's, problem with conflict and how you can disagree and still work together, and how maybe splitting hairs and the kind of focus on language isn't necessarily the kind of route to political success?
Well, so look, the left has a grand tradition of factionalism, and I don't want to give it too much of a bad rap. Politics is about conflict as well, and that's as true for the right and the centre as it is for the left. I think you're right to identify that splitting hairs about language is particularly, it's a time suck. And I think what this reflects is that people like me, graduates trained in arts and humanities contexts, we've become too dominant in left-wing spaces. So at university, I was trained to pick apart language and to find contradiction and find dissensus and to find problems and problematic discourses. And then, if all you've got is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. I took that toolbox with me into organising spaces. And I know I'm not alone in having done that. The problem is that politics isn't language. It isn't a book. It isn't a seminar room. And if instead of going, okay, well, what's the strategy for achieving these very concrete material goals, we're going, can we just think about the language we use? That's going to go on forever. Like it's so self-perpetuating. So I think that that's why it plays out in that way on the left. But like I said, I think it's really important to consider that the dominance of identity overall for the left, the centre and the right, that is a product of what 45 years of neoliberalism has done to collective political expression.
I mean, since the book came out, there has been what you could call, I think, like a strand of coverage, which has kind of been, you were a prominent person promoting these ideas. I think the New Statesman called you a foot soldier of identity politics or something along those lines. I mean, do you think that some of that pushback is fair? Do you see that criticism?
Well, the thing is obviously I've changed my mind on some stuff because...
As everyone would do over the, 10...
Who doesn't?
10, 12 years you've been...
But I've also... The thing is that they saw a brown woman on the left and they went, aha, she loves identity politics. And, there's typecasting. And I talk about how this works in the media, which is, you get the call from a producer and they've identified you from your social media presence and they look at your identity characteristics and they go, you can play this part. So you can be the person who says that everything is racist or everything is sexist because you fit the bill. And even if you don't say those things and don't think those things, you're forced into that shape. And I think there's been a bit of that which has gone on here, which is, yes, I probably had a bit too much of an orientation towards thinking about language, thinking about discourse. Yes, my thinking about the usefulness and the applicability of concepts like white privilege has changed. But I've always been a Marxist and I've always been class first. And so the media has very few stories that it likes to tell. One of them is I used to be on the left and now I'm on the right. And they needed to shoehorn me into that, even though what this book hopefully shows is that I went from Marxist to Marxister.
And we can laugh at some of the examples and we can, poke fun at them. But did you have a concern at all that people on the left might feel uncomfortable with that or might feel that it's kind of, I suppose this is the type of conversation to happen in-house? Yeah,
right. Keep the dirty laundry, indoors. I get that. And I suppose maybe I used to feel that way as well. But here's the problem with that way of thinking, which is one, the internet is sort of like the shop window of politics. And so when you've got really mad identitarian stuff going on online, that does shape people's perceptions of your movement, of your cause, and it shapes whether or not they want to participate in it. So then if you're saying it's not a problem, those people feel kind of gaslit. They feel like, well, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. Your insistence that this isn't a problem is at odds with what I can see with my own eyes. So I think it's important to challenge this stuff head on and openly for that reason. The second thing is that taking it back to that event in Liverpool where Roger Hallam called everyone a cunt, the majority of people in that room did not want it to go down, an identitarian, endless, round of flagellation. But they found it really, really hard to get a grip on the direction of conversation because they felt that they couldn't challenge it without appearing racist or transphobic or whatever else. So the other importance of having this conversation publicly is that for that majority of people in the room who are really politically committed people, is that they feel empowered to go, okay, this is not the most strategic use of our time. We've tried to deal with it all in-house for years and years and years, and it didn't work. So this is part of me trying to, take a different strategy and a different approach. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong and I'll try something else in book 2.
Book 2, okay, you heard it here first. Talk to me about middle-class sofas and middle-class dogs.
Okay, all right. If I say middle-class dog, you all know what I mean, right? The doodles. right? Like obviously a dog can't own assets, right? It doesn't have a class status, but you all know what I mean. Similarly, if I say grey velvet sofa, you also know what I mean. It's a little bit nouveau riche. It's a bit like, okay, plumber done well for himself, 2 cars. We all have, these class associations that become linked to the most everyday of objects and images. And why this is important is because Marxists like myself would go, okay, it's just about asset ownership. Okay, it's just about your relationship to the means of production, but that's not how we live class identity, and that's not how we read class on an everyday basis. There's a sociologist called Dan Evans who wrote Nation of Shopkeepers, which is so good. Even though I disagree with him a lot, I think it's very good. I think it's a really good book and you should read it. Because the thing that he understands very well is that the left sometimes tries to flatten out all these differences in textures and habitus and life world because we want to wish the coalition we want into being. And the thing he's saying is that betrays a real lack of understanding. So one of the things I try and do in the book is that while I do loop right back around to this understanding of class as being about asset ownership, to say this is going to be the shape of the coalition we want to build, you can't just snap your fingers and make all of that cultural baggage go away, because that's the world we live in.
And you have in the same, I think it's the same chapter, you have a very interesting kind of analysis, I suppose, of the class as it relates to the London riots. And you flag this Google trend, which I keep thinking about, and I just think it's such a smart way of showing this, but the kind of shift in terminology from the use of the word chav to the switch to suddenly it becoming white working class. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that shift and your kind of, I suppose, analysis as it relates to identity politics.
Sure. So when it comes to, there are some people in their 20s in this room, which is disgusting. But for those of us who are old enough to remember, the idea of the chav was this moral panic really prevalent in the early 2000s, going up to the beginning of the 2010s, and it could be boiled down to this: there was a layer of disgusting underclass people who were feral, criminal, on benefits as a lifestyle choice, and you could identify them by their Burberry caps and their gold chains and their love of rap music.
It's Benefit Street time,
right?
Isn't it?
Benefit Street kind of thing. And what was interesting about this construction of the chav was that while the person you would call a chav was very often white, you would look down on them for their proximity to black culture and other minority ethnic groups. So Vicky Pollard, you might remember, like one of the jokes was that she had like a pram of like 10 babies and they were all different races. Because if there's one thing more disgusting than being poor, it's being poor and having sex with men of colour, right? gross. And that was the kind of dominant view of class at the time, which was everyone was on a train and it was destination bourgeoisie. And here were these people who were too stupid and too feckless to board the carriage. And then what happens is, multiple. You've got the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, right? The train has stopped moving. So if you're not at destination middle class now, you're not going to get there. The second thing, and I think this is really important for the UK context, is the riots, which was, the London riots of 2011 were catalysed by the police killing of Mark Duggan, a black working class guy from Tottenham, but they resonated with a much deeper anger that was to do with austerity and was to do with the bailout of the banks. If you read interviews with rioters themselves, they would say things like, we're getting our tax money back. So that was very much at the forefront of people's minds. And then I think there's another thing which is quite important to consider, which is 2015 onwards, the rise of Jeremy Corbyn and millennial socialism. So why I think this is important is that with the chav, you've got this idea really of a multi-ethnic working class who are angry and they're criminal. And then after, 2008, you've got some very good reasons for working class people to be angry. So the thing you're going to have to do is break down those connections where people identify with one another. So it's no longer the chav who might be white, but identifies very strongly with the experiences of black and minority ethnic working class people. It's the white working class, decent, left behind, forgotten, and if it wasn't for all this bleeding heart liberal stuff like teaching about slavery in schools, we could give these individuals the attention that they need and deserve. And it's funny, right? How, the white working class are always being left behind by things like woke culture and not like poverty or austerity or deindustrialization or rent prices or the fact that schools haven't been invested enough. No, it's because we talk about racism too much. And I had this idea for a while, and I was like, I'm going to have to try and back this up with some evidence, which journalists don't have to do, but I felt compelled like this one time. And I saw that the decline of the use of the word chavs was matched by an increase in the use of the phrase white working class. So it's like we transferred one set of anxieties and fears around class and race, and we translated them into another. And I think that wasn't a coincidence. It was a reflection to changing economic and political circumstances of the time. And I think it was intended to achieve very concrete political results. And if you think that I'm just, taking some things which happen to be simultaneous and reading too much into it, consider the fact that the same journalists who talked about chavs as, and I'm quoting directly now, lard-gutted slappers and dismal ineducables, about 10 years later started going, what about the left-behind white working class? Isn't it terrible that they've been treated with such contempt? The exact same journalists writing for the exact same newspapers.
I mean, the media is a big part of this book, comes in for a fair amount of criticism. Really easy question, small question. What needs to change?
Okay, where to start? The first is the question of ownership. You cannot separate what's in the media from how it is owned. There is a reason why billionaires want to buy newspapers and social media platforms. It's not because they generate loads and loads of profit. It's because it's a way of manufacturing consent for an increasingly unequal society. That's all there is to it. So if you want to change what you see in the media, if you want to change the kinds of stories that are being covered, if you want there to be more information out there in circulation which challenges the interests of the wealthy, well then very wealthy people can't be allowed to own media. Super simple. The second thing is that politics desks have got way too much sway over dictating the national news agenda. And this is the result of decades-long trends. News is very expensive to produce. That's why you've got, the Reach Media Group, where you've just got a load of people in their 20s chained to their laptops churning out 8 articles a day. And then you've got someone in Westminster whose job it is to go for drinks with, advisors and MPs and ministers and get the latest gossip. Because organic news gathering is more expensive, it means that these politics reporters have had a lot more power to say, okay, well, the day's news is what's happening in Westminster, the who's up, who's down. But the thing about these politics reporters is that they are, there's some good ones, but
I'm just trying to see if any of our politics reporters are in the room.
If you're in the room, of course you're one of the good ones. Whatever. You get paid enough. You don't need me to be nice to you. But politics reporters, while there are some good ones, their work is produced in spite of the incentives, which governs politics reporting rather than because of the incentives. One of the incentives that governs politics reporting is that you, as a journalist, are only worth as much as the quality of your contact book. So if you're really, really close to, say, Ed Balls and Yvette Cooper, and their careers are on the up, well, then your currency as a journalist has inflated commensurately. So if then, say for instance, a socialist captures the top of the Labour Party by mistake, which is what happened in 2015, you then have an alignment of interests between disgruntled Labour right-wingers who are not powerful within the party anymore and the journalists who are really close with them because their career prospects depended on these people continuing to be important. So then you create this situation where you've got a whole bunch of journalists whose careers are dependent on being incurious and hostile to this new movement in politics. There are other things which are wrong with this system of coziness. Another is that there's a revolving door. So you've got Allegra Stratton, who worked for Newsnight. She was a big part of that whole "there is no alternative to austerity." Did some absolutely dreadful journalism when it came to interviewing someone who was a benefits claimant and misrepresented them as being unemployed when they were in fact in work. She then becomes, a top media advisor for Boris Johnson. She resigns in disgrace because of Partygate. Can all remember her crying outside her house. But then what's more embarrassing than all of that, the fact that someone from media can go into politics, is that media fucking took her back. The same thing happened with Ross Kempsell. He's a politics correspondent for, I believe it was Talk Radio. Does a hideous soft serve interview with Boris Johnson where he says, "What do you do to relax?" This is during the, I think it was the leadership campaign where Brexit was on the agenda, and said he was like, "What do you do for fun?" Bitch, I don't fucking care what he does for fun. I want to know about his policies. He then quits being a politics reporter. He goes to work for the Conservative Party, exits again, works in journalism, goes back into politics. I think then he maybe even exits again, and then goes back in and is one of the youngest members of the House of Lords, right? How embarrassing is it that as an industry, we take these people back? No journalist who takes themselves and their mission seriously should expect to be let back into journalism after they've been in politics, right? Because they should trust that their former colleagues would go, "Sorry, you went from predator to prey." So the fact that they're allowed back in, it shows you that the adversarial relationship between politicians and journalists is wholly constructed, right? It is wholly at the whim of that particular journalist, their particular career interests, and it's not something which is encouraged by these institutions as a whole.
Do you think there's a kind of difference between journalists who, like yourself actually, who have been very clear in your political beliefs and you're a journalist of the left? Do you think part of this problem is that people are purporting to be neutral reporters rather than kind of being clear about allegiances? Or do you think actually just any of that kind of interplay? Because I suppose the reason I ask is because obviously, you are yourself close to several politicians or people who, I don't know if, political figures. Does that impact your reporting? Did you see what I mean? That there's the kind of...
So I think
when you hang out with people, you become friends.
Yeah, and so I think, just to say that the people who I hang out with are my friends and they're mostly Tottenham reprobates and aren't politicians because I don't want to fucking hang out with these people. But I take the point that I've been parts of political movements where, if not my social life necessarily, my political goals are in alignment with the people who I'm then talking about for Novara Media. The important thing, I think, as you said, is transparency.
Right.
So I don't write about people pretending I don't know them, which is something that you'll often see when Allegra Stratton first started writing about Rishi Sunak. She neglected to mention in her initial pieces that I think he sounds godfather to her kids and was, is best friends with her husband. Right? And so it's like, oh, Rishi Sunak is this guy who you know intimately, at least say that. But these people don't. A lot of these connections operate in the dark. So that's one thing. I think another thing, which is perhaps more important than transparency, is getting rid of this sort of elite class of journalists with special access to politicians. I think that the lobby, as in, the Westminster estate, that should be made available to any journalist with accreditation and an NUJ membership, because then it means that anyone can do this kind of political reporting, and it won't just be the people who are incentivized to get really close to a certain number of people. Everyone's a free marketeer until it comes to journalism, and then they want a closed shop union.
I'm getting the 10-minute warning, which I'm annoyed about because I've got loads of questions. Oh, it's actually the 20, don't worry guys, it's fine. Because I wanted to talk to you about the internet, because it is a book that I think is fairly online. I recognised every reference that you wrote in
you've got
there.
the same parentheses as
I know,
me.
and I honestly had the reaction of like, oh God, I know who Jorts is. But
That was the part that my husband was really like, do not use the phrase Jorts the cat in your book. And I was insistent that it was important because it went back to the thing about the internet being the shop window. But he was like, normal people will hate this.
Well, I got it. And that says maybe more about me. I wonder, this is kind of referring back to something you said earlier, that it felt to me, and I admittedly am someone who very much was not involved in, but witnessed the kind of social justice Facebook era, the Facebook groups where everyone suddenly was, this is like early 2010s university conversation. And I've been thinking a lot about the kind of difference between having your kind of political awakening through your family, through community organising, through activism, through kind of in-person experiences versus online, whether that's through Facebook groups or through Instagram or influencers sharing, kind of cut downs. And I wonder whether you think that matters, that kind of distinction, and if you think it does, what kind of impact it's having on our political, but also maybe cultural conversation.
I think it really, really matters. So I think that we're in an era where politics is so much more disaggregated than it used to be. And this bears out just in the simple numbers. Political party membership, trade union membership, these are both on downward trends. So how people experience their politics is through mediatized forms. What podcasts you listen to and follow, which influencers you like, what news you consume and where, what you share on social media. And one of the things that I write about in the book is that these spaces are, designed to prioritize and reward certain kinds of interactions and emotional affects over others. So the emotions of outrage, a sense of personal threat, these are things which are both stoked and then rewarded through greater visibility by social media platforms. So instead of politics being something that you experience as a form of belonging, it's being shaped by a fear of social ostracism. And so if you create that heightened sense of threat, and hopefully something that comes across in the book is an awareness that I also exist in that heightened sense of threat, and that really shaped my worldview for quite a while, is that it makes you unable to hear other people. You see them as rivals in the attention economy or someone who's coming along to take your head off. And that means that you want to get stuck in there with the knife first before they do. This is the one bit of evolutionary psychology that I buy, which is we're social creatures and our one tool of survival as human beings is belonging and community. So if you're constantly in an online environment where you're witnessing people being cast out of the circle, I think that activates a very primal kind of fear within you because we need each other to survive. That also means that where left-wing politics are taking place in those spaces, highly mediatized spaces, online spaces, the emotional affects that it produces, hostility, suspicion, anger, sense of threat, that's really conducive to the right. Because the right say, don't trust people, they're all bastards, build your walls nice and high, you can only trust yourself, maybe your family, as long as there are no women in it. Like, that's the story told by the right. Whereas the left, we need mutual aid, we need cooperation. We need a sense of possibility that comes from people who don't have much power coming together. So I think that's why the left are at more of a disadvantage in online spaces, because your content might go far, but still you're somehow never building the kind of movement that you want to see. And this is unfortunately something which only occurred to me after the manuscript was already submitted, which is that the solution to that is what you would call base building activities. So political activities that bring you into connection with other people, bring you into connection with people who are different from yourself. And not only are you trying to pursue strategic goals, extract material concessions from capital and those in power, but you're building the kinds of organisation which create left-wing power outside of the electoral system. And that can be something like a tenants union, that can be something like a community union like Acorn, it can be a trade union, it can be pushing your union in a more political direction, it can be something as simple as a neighbourhood campaign to get more streetlights installed. All of these things are base building activities which bring you into community with other people, because I think our tolerance for other people and their bullshit is a lot higher in real life than it is in the abstract. And the problem with when we're trying to debate things, whether it's in newspaper columns or in a WhatsApp group chat or any kind of mediatized form, is that we're considering other people in the abstract, right? They become sort of avatars and totems and not real to us.
You write in the book about the racist, sexist, really horrific abuse that
I get from you.
Yes, all from me, from other people online, and I think you mainly focus online. I don't know if it is spread into real life, but the way that it kind of impacts the way that you carry yourself in the world. That combination, I suppose, of being a very prominent person on the left, being someone that people will recognise from their TV. Spending that time as you did, going on, TV and having the kinds of conversations you mentioned, the kind of, is Apu from The Simpsons racist, those kinds of debates. Would you ever, the combination of that, I think, with social media is quite potent. Would you ever consider coming off it, or are you kind of wedded to it? Yeah.
Did my husband put you up to this? He's always like, you can just log off, and I'm like, no.
Honestly, that section where you describe the kind of, I
feel like Gollum with the ring. I'm like, I know it's bad for me, but I love it.
But you're gonna stick around.
I can change him. Look, I'm
next owner of X.
I'm gonna give advice that I'm not gonna take myself. All of you should log off, but let me go down with the ship.
You'll tell us all what's going on.
Yeah, I'll be like, let me perish.
Okay, so that's a no.
I mean, look, maybe I will.
Yeah.
Maybe I will, and maybe I'll discover some hidden resource of self-control that I don't currently possess. I don't know how likely that is, man. I can't lie.
I mean, I'm still on there, so. I suppose, just to wrap up before we go to questions, what is if you could try to summarise it, or what is the one thing that you would hope that people reading this book might take away from it or start to think about?
To not be afraid of other people. Don't look at other people primarily as threats to you, because if you do that, the other side have won. Straight away. The engine of liberation throughout history is and always has been people seeking common cause with one another. We have had no other tool, and particularly if you're on the left, you don't have the money, you don't have the newspaper ownership, you don't have the forces of state violence on your side, like the cops and the army. All you have is each other. So if you're going into politics with this idea that other people can only cause you harm, you've fucked it, right? You've completely fucked it. But here's the bit which is hopeful. And I was thinking about this because it's something that my mum always says, which is she was a big part of the anti-apartheid movement. And so, she would be outside Barclays telling people not to bank with Barclays and, knocking South African oranges out of people's hands. And, she got arrested. And she said to me, I did that all those years without ever once thinking that I would see a free South Africa. And then it fucking happened. Part of how those in power work is that they try and make you feel that the current state of affairs is just inevitable, and it's not. They try and make you feel that change is impossible, and it's not. The left has always won against seemingly insurmountable odds. And I think the times that we live in are no worse than what came before. The thing that you've got to do is form community and comradeship with people unlike yourself if you want to achieve anything.
Very nice. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to the audience, and I can't see anything. Have we got microphones somewhere? Should we go to Paul, and then we'll go to the woman on the front row?
Paul Atherton. I'm a fellow at the Royal Society of Arts. I was just wondering if you dealt at all with the different working classes across generations that currently exist in Britain. So I've been 16 years homeless now. I claim disability benefit, but I would still class myself as middle class because even though I grew up in a Welsh mining community, we lived in a posh house in a place called the Avenue in a village called Ysrymynach. And I wouldn't define it by money, but I think class today is defined by money. And I was just curious if you covered that at all in your book.
I'm not sure if I look at it through just a generational lens, but I do talk about changes to the economy. So once upon a time, if you went to university, that meant you were middle class. But if you are in tens of thousands of pounds worth of debt and you've got a job in data entry and you're, paying through the nose for an ex-council flat, are you part of the bourgeoisie? I don't think so. You may know what a flat white is, you may know what an avocado is, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're middle class. So that's something which has changed, which is some of these signifiers of, particular consumer habits especially. I don't think they mark you out quite so well. So you can have people who are culturally middle class, but in terms of asset wealth, absolutely not. Another thing, and this is what Dan Evans is so good at writing about, is that you actually, so Marx made a prediction, and he made lots of good ones. This is one of his stinkers, but they're few and far between. But he thought that the artisan class, so, people who own the tools by which they work, that would get smaller and they would become part of the industrial proletariat. That didn't happen, and what we've seen, particularly in this country, is the growth of the self-employed class, right? Like a massive increase, particularly after deindustrialization. But that layer of, self-employed people who Marx would have understood as the petty bourgeoisie, they're actually really divided. So, like I said, you've got these doing well for themselves, plumbers, electricians, hairdressers, beauticians, who maybe don't live in the big cities, but can commute into them, who didn't go to uni. And then you've got downwardly mobile graduates with jobs in copy editing or graphic design, and they're freelancers and they own their laptop and basically nothing else. And what's interesting is that though they may be part of the same class when it comes to, their relationship to the means of production, their cultural worldview is just so different. And their life world is so different. So I think that if you're trying to map how class has changed over time, I think that's a really important one. I suppose I wouldn't necessarily frame it in generational terms, but not because that's wrong, just because I didn't think of it.
Thank you.
I just want to pick up on what you said about the decrease in the word chav and increase in working class. Do you see that as a concerted effort that's happened with these journalists, these writers, or is it just one person said that and then others have kind of ran with it? I'm just interested in how that actually happens.
Well, the thing is that these journalists are very close to think tanks, and many of these think tanks all work in the same fucking building. So, I mean, you tell me, maybe it's all just a coincidence. So something which establishment journalists love to say is that they go, well, if it's between cock-up and conspiracy, it's always a cock-up. And the first thing is that, well, no, sometimes there are conspiracies. You just find out about it 30 years later that they tried to kill Castro with like a poison pen. And the other thing is that there is a third C, which is class interests. So, I think that part of it is experimentation. People throw things at the wall and they see what sticks. What sticks is a product of the economic environment, but they also identify their class interests absolutely ruthlessly. And it was one of the chapter titles comes from Margaret Thatcher. She said, "Economics are the method. The object is to change the heart and soul." Journalists aren't in charge of the economics part, but we're supposed to be good readers of the heart and soul. And if you're a journalist who is dispositionally right-wing, you'll tell the stories which are in service of your own view of what the economic model should be. And they are deliberate, very deliberate in doing so.
I think we've got 3.
First of all, thank you for a great talk. And one question I had, so in terms of like not being afraid of people, to what extent do you think technology is like making people more afraid of people? One, in that like you're behind a screen, not in real person. Second, that also like someone can come and like manipulate it, like bots, those kind of things. And then how does the left engage with technology to kind of bridge a gap? Like it's been so important in terms of connecting movements, connecting people. On the other side, when does it become a distraction and actually like hurt what we're trying to achieve?
Okay, so I'm going to answer it in reverse. So how can the left use technology? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's definitely something that I'm trying to work out. It's something that my colleagues at Novara Media are trying to work out, which is how do you have an experience of consuming information which doesn't make you feel more alienated and anxious? The answer to that is, I don't know. I've got no idea, but I'm very curious to find out if other people have ideas. Technology has a massive role in making us feel more afraid of people because so much of what we see is also designed to make us feel afraid. So it might be, those videos you see of, inner city youths running wild. And if I was to think about what London is like just based on what I see on the internet, I would think that you couldn't walk down the street without being accosted by someone with a machete. That's obviously not true. And this is important for what we think the rest of the world is like, for what we think the rest of society is like. Similarly, if all you're encountering about trans people is that they're deviants, criminals, predators, well, that's going to shape your perception of what they're like and what's out there to do you harm. The flip side of this, and I think this might be something which is a bit controversial, which is if my sense of what race relations in the UK is like comes from the internet, I would think that every single white person I meet like has a KKK hood at home, right? Like there is a sense of pessimism, right? Pessimism about what other people are like, what people who form majority groups are like, whether those are ethnic groups or anything else. And I think an overemphasis on these people are out to do us harm. The fact is that, people's attitudes to race, their, appetite for difference, their capacity to live with difference has changed a lot over the decades. That's a good thing. And that also the history of this country isn't just one of colonialism and slavery. It's also resistance to those things. And this is an important story to tell because it gives you a sense of what's politically possible. Has anyone here heard of the Lancashire cotton famine? So the Lancashire cotton famine happened when, during the American Civil War, the cotton mill workers of Lancashire refused to touch, to work with, to refine slave-produced cotton. And they refused to go into work. They went on strike, and that meant people starved. It meant that there was rioting in the streets. And this was not because they were diverse communities with lots of black people. These were, 99.9% white British. That is a part of our history. That's a part of our class history, that there were white people who probably never met a black person in their entire lives who said, we would rather starve than touch slave-produced cotton. And so, again, it's what stories are shared on social media. Very often it's the ones which will emphasize, and these are historical facts, the British involvement with pioneering the slave trade, our history of colonialism, our present conditions of extraction from the global south. It's important to know the truth. But sometimes that truth can constrain your sense of what's possible and what can be done. I think I just answered a different question to the one you asked. I'm so sorry.
I think we have time for one more question. 2 more questions? We'll go one. Alice, you can choose.
Hi, so I'm at risk of not being let in when I come back in a month for another event, possibly of the sort of soft right, and economically, like that's basically where I sit. And thank you for sort of expressing your, the dirty laundry, as you described it, of the left, because that's...
Oh, the right's got some dirty laundry too. Let's get into it.
Hell of a lot. But what really interests me is what I thought is, this is someone I would love to have a good disagreement with. I agree with you probably on 80-90% of the diagnosis. Disagree on the treatment side. What I'd be really interested in, are there any people on the right, or what are some of the characteristics of people on the right who you think, I would love to have a good disagreement with that person? Like, the diagnosis is there, but I disagree with the treatment.
I mean, I'm a naturally conflict-averse person, so I don't want to get in a disagreement with anyone. I mean, to be honest, I interviewed one of those people for the book, and it was Dominic Cummings. Like, he's someone who I find really fascinating. I think that he had he had a perception of the British electorate and what you could get it to do that very few people had. And he was able to look at class composition, asset ownership, geographical spread of voters, and see that that could be a vehicle for the populist right when very few other people could. So he'd be one such individual. I mean, someone who I disagree with on basically everything, but I really enjoy talking to because they're very considered, is Timothy Stanley, who writes for The Telegraph. Worked with him on The Moral Maze. And he's someone who I enjoy talking to because he's not lazy in his ideas. I may disagree with them vociferously, but the act of disagreement improves my arguments every time I speak to him. The one thing that maybe I would perhaps differ with you a bit on is I just fucking hate the smug Oxford Union debating style of rebuttal and counter rebuttal and because I just think it's so masturbatory, the whole thing. And it's also a way of class gatekeeping politics by saying you have to talk like this and you have to hold yourself like this and you have to participate like this, otherwise you're not a part of the club. And the thing is that politics has never been a debating club. It's always been a bar fight. And this is just one more way of concealing that truth from most people who know it to be true because they're often on the losing side.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
So that was a very violent way for me to end.
Well, yeah, I mean, do you want to wrap it up in another way? No, I'm going to wrap it up and say it really is a properly fascinating, surprising and nuanced book. And like I said, it's also funny, and I think you've got a taste of it this evening. Ash is going to be signing some copies of the book right here. Right here on this very table where we're sat very far away from each other.
Don't try and fight me. I am very conflict averse.
Thank you so much, Ash.
Thank you.